Hey everybody, so we hope you enjoyed this mini game for chapter 2 where you got a chance to look into Theodore's 4 hard drives and get some information and backstory on the Protos and what went on before where we're currently at in the timeline. So with that being the case, we wanted to put together this video and kind of recap what's happened in the lore so far and kind of break down what you uncovered in those hard drives so that the story is a little more clear and you have a better idea of what's going on when we go into chapter 3. So going back to the prologue, which is what we put out a little bit before the initial drop in February, it kind of set the scene for Alphabot Society and gave you a little bit of a backstory on how the Alphabots came to be. And so to recap that real quick, we learn about the 10 original Protos, which were the 10 original Alphabots from each faction, and that they were made by a company called Decentel, it's a human company, and they made these Protos to kind of help sustain the main pillars of life so that they could go into the metaverse more and have these robots to keep up with what's going on in the real world. So after the Protos were a success, they then made the 10,000 Alphabots, which they kind of descended from. And after that, humans started to go deeper into the metaverse, leaving the Protos the ones in charge of all the Alphabots and keeping up with the day-to-day of what needs to be done in the real world. And after a while, the Protos decided that they wanted a better life for them and their Alphabots, similar to those of their creators, where they could do as they please and they have interests and families and things like that. So the Alphabots kind of became, or the Protos I should say, became kind of self-aware and decided to shut the metagate, locking in the humans into the metaverse and allowing the Alphabots to be who they would desire to be. And after a while of that, the Protos then disappear in this big electromagnetic incident. But the Alphabots have no recollection of this. When that electromagnetic incident happened, it caused all the Alphabots to be rebooted and they lost all memory of the Protos. So now, by the time we get to chapter 1, it's been hundreds of years since then, and the Alphabots have carried on with their lives and kind of forgot about the Protos. But there are some people that still believe in the Protos as like fabled figures, and they believe that they were real, but the majority believe that they weren't. So with that being the case, we're introduced to our first 3 characters, Raid, Zeke, and Fora. And Raid is kind of a conspiracy theorist and is searching for evidence of the Protos. And he happens to find these coordinates on a hard drive, an old Decentel hard drive that Zeke found for him. And Raid finds these coordinates and convinces his friends to go out to the wastelands and see what it's all about. And on their way out there, they're shot out of the sky by a pulse that's coming through the sky, and it hits the ship, and they begin to crash and plummet to the ground. So this is where we kind of gave you guys your first decision. So do you choose to crash into the wastelands or crash into the ocean? And if you were to crash into the wastelands, which you did, but that's where you would meet Shepard. And if you'd crashed into the ocean, you would be introduced to the floating city of Valerie, which is occupied by these pirate-like greedy merchants that are kind of money hungry and treasure hunty, and they care about the monetary value of things. But since you guys chose to crash into the wastelands, you crashed there and you're introduced to Shepard, who is a banished keeper, and he's been out in the wastelands and in this specific kind of encampment for the past 200 years. And he lives with 3 other keepers that they are all hive-minded together. So they are 4 individual Alphabots, but they kind of act and move and think as one. So the group decides to keep it a secret that they're out there because of these coordinates and of what Raid knows, and play it off as they are out there trying to get some materials for a house that Fora is building. So they kind of brush that off, or the keepers kind of brush that off for the time being, and allow the 3 bots access to some spare parts that they have to fix Fora. And while Fora is getting fixed, the group notices that the camp starts to be invaded by a group of merchants. And the keepers fight the merchants. Shepard beats them and dismembers them completely, at which point they then hear some shouting over behind the encampment and over by a sand dune. So they go and look, and they find another keeper locked inside of this like storage container compartment type thing attached to a hovercraft, and they approach him, And he tells them that his name is Theodore and that he had been working with the merchants now for the past 40 years, helping them with like deep sea recovery missions and treasure hunts and things like that. But in his research and everything for those projects, he began to find evidence of the Protos, and that's what led the floating city of Valerie out to the wastelands, and that's why the merchants are there, is they too are looking for the Protos. And upon hearing this, Raid gets super excited and tells him about the coordinates that he has, and this is the first time that the Shepherd is hearing about that. So after they kind of have their big powwow about it, the Shepherd grabs up the three Alphabots and throws them in the container with Theodore, and he begins to take off towards the anomaly. And they're with him, they're attached, but they're kind of engaged. So that was the end of chapter 2, and we left you guys with the decision of, do you overthrow the Shepherd on the way to the anomaly, or do you sit back and wait and look at these hard drives that Theodore has? He has 4 hard drives that were a part of his research, and he kind of took from the merchants when he escaped. And you can either sit and wait and look at those hard drives or overthrow the Shepherd. So it was a very close vote. B was winning for a while, which was overthrow the Shepherd. But then in that last day, you guys decided, okay, we're gonna wait and analyze the hard drives. So the decision was very close, with 51%, 49%. But since you chose to do that, this week has all been, each day we dropped a hard drive and it contains the contents of those hard drives, but there's kind of this overarching theme for each one. So I kind of wanted to break those down a little bit so you're better prepared for chapter 3. So in the first one, we get evidence of the Protos. There's surveillance footage of Protos. There's talk between 2 humans about what the Protos are doing. So we have our first real evidence that the Protos existed. When we get into hard drive 2, we've got some evidence of a human resistance. There's these humans that don't believe in the metaverse and don't believe in the Alphabot initiative, and are kind of coordinating or planning something behind the scenes, and you get a little bit of glimpse of some of that content and their outpost. In hard drive 3, there's talks of a virus that the humans are developing, and there's evidence of them testing it on Alphabots, and it looks as like a defense mechanism to develop this virus. And then finally, in hard drive 4, we've got evidence of a distress signal and something happening at this outpost. So it's kind of like a lineage of, okay, proving the Protos are there, showing that there was a human resistance. The humans are trying to defend themselves with a virus, but something doesn't go according to plan. And this is all while we're on our way to the anomaly. So as we go into next week, chapter 2 is split into 2 parts. The video that we put out 2 weeks ago, and now this little mini game to provide more context to the lore. And now as we go into next week, we will show you the outcome of making that decision as we pull into the anomaly. So there will be a short video next week with a follow-up of what happens now that you know what you know. And after we drop that video is when we will reveal the 2 NFTs that you guys have been competing for this whole time in the competition, and we'll better explain their use and utility. So keep an eye out for that. But all in all, we hope you enjoyed everything up to this point. There's kind of a lot to unpack, and we just want to make sure that everything is clear as we continue to move forward, and you kind of understand that not only was this competition a game and there's a reward, but we're also providing information into the overarching lore that could help you as we go forward and into the future to kind of know other variables that are at play. So we hope you enjoy, and we'll talk to you more next week.